Today's webinar is on support systems and why they make all the difference. I can tell you that the likelihood that your child is going to grow into having a productive adulthood is much, much higher than others. And one of the reasons is because you are here, because you are in the in an area where you're focusing your efforts to collect and gain new information. And support systems, I have found over the course of time, actually happen to be one of my very favorite life success attributes because they are critical to the ability for our young people to fall forward, fail forward, and find ways to find success. And so I want to talk a little bit about support systems and why they're important and how to cultivate them, and then glean some of the wisdom from Susan Simon. Susan is my guest today, and she is the mother of Max Simon, who attended SOAR for many, many years. And over the course of time, we developed a very wonderful friendship with the entire family. And I am delighted to have Susan join me today and give you some perspective, as her son is now, how old is he, Susan?
Old. Makes me feel very old. He's 34.
He's 34 years old.
Yes, he is.
Been doing this a long time, and you know, and he's doing very well. And Susan will share some of his remarkable successes and certainly give you an opportunity to learn a little bit about. At some point, yeah, we'll make a time available for any of you to ask questions to either Susan or I, but let's go ahead and get started. And I think one of the first things I want to talk about is that that with my children, you know, I never used the word disappointed. I made sure that I was communicating and demonstrating unconditional love and support for my kids, and I accept them for who they are. I will work through my own challenges, and if you've attended any of my webinars, you know that I'm not a perfect parent. I have made some mistakes. You know, am human, and I often err, but I come back and I listen and I talk and I negotiate with, you know, with the entire family to see if we can find what is the best path forward. I believe also one of the most important things that I have benefited from as an adult with ADHD is, and what I try and give to my children, is that I separate intent from behavior, because often, you know, my daughter, you know, she forgets. She's not being willful. She's not being, she's not trying to undermine the process. She just simply gets caught up in other things and she forgets the task that she's supposed to do. And if I assign intent to that, then I get really angry. But if I recognize that, you know, we just need to do a better job of creating systems that are going to support her and not forgetting or getting her to complete her tasks, then, you know, she's very compliant and wants to help. I think it's also critical to separate your disapproval of behavior and your love for the child. I can not like a behavior, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to love you any less. And I have often said that I do not use the word "I'm disappointed with you." You know, and I think that's really, really critical. We've had Rick Lavoie on one of our previous webinars, and he has one of my favorite quotes, which is, "There's nothing more unequal than the equal treatment of unequals." And I think it's important not to compare kids, not to compare other people's kids to your kids, and not even to compare your own kids to each other. Fair is not equal. You develop support systems for each of your children based on what you believe is going to be in their best interest, not what is fair or equal, because those two things are critically different. I also want to talk a little bit about building in support systems. All right, create a support team around your child, and we'll talk about who that is. But that's, you know, be careful of who their friends are. You know, relatives that encourage and support them, make sure that they have access to them. Relatives who discourage or undermine or create opportunities that are not healthy for your kids, avoid those relatives. Get the kind of help that you need with professionals, whether they're therapists or coaches or tutors, and make sure that you have a well-balanced support team around your child. I think that it's also really important as you're thinking about support system to avoid the sink or swim mentality. My mentor, Jonathan Jones, has often said, when was drowning ever a growth experience for somebody? I want you to also recognize that if you're going to ask and know that our kids are going to fail forward, that they're going to take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, that we want to minimize the consequences or costs of failures, because our kids are going to fail a lot as they try and find a way to move forward. Now, that doesn't mean eliminate the cost of failure, because failure can be a tremendous educator, but you do certainly want to create that tangible support network, that trampoline at the bottom of the trapeze that will allow them to try and do the double flip and can be caught versus falling and landing on a hard surface. There are ways and appropriate times to minimize those consequences. And then I want to talk a little bit now about asking permission to coach, because when you come into a situation and you're trying to create support systems for your kids and you stomp all over them, that's not healthy. But instead, giving permission, versus asking permission. You give permission to your kids that they're going to try and they're going to fail. You ask your kids permission. Hey, do you mind if I give you some advice here? Do you mind if I coach you up? All right, because one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to say, no, I don't want your help, or they're going to say, yes, please, I want to know what you have to say. And very often, if they tell you no, a little bit later, after they reflect, they're going to come back and they're going to say, okay, what did you want to say? Because when you've given them the green light to accept your feedback, then you've made them much more open to what that feedback is going to be. You can give permission to reflect, all right? And then you want to ask permission to ask questions. Hey, let's ask a couple questions, which then can help that reflection process. Here are a few more strategies, about creating a team around your child. Consider role models consider the role of meds to level the field. Now, every child is different, and the way they're going to react to meds is going to be different. Meds are not a panacea. They're not going to work for everybody. But finding the right meds could be quite extraordinary. I'll use my daughter as an example. We had my daughter on stimulant medications, and she was, quite frankly, very unpleasant. She was mean and caustic and short-tempered. And while I was off on a conference, my wife decided to take her off meds. I came home. Now this was nearly 7-8 years ago. I came home, and my daughter was this sweet, loving, cuddly, fun, easygoing, wonderful little lady. And I could not believe the difference that the medication had been making with her. Now, she's also, as I mentioned, very forgetful and can be a little scatterbrained. She's really bright. She's very talented. She's a heck of an artist. She's a cheerleader. She does a lot of things really, really well. But when it comes to focusing, she needs a little extra help. And finally, we found a non-stimulant medication that really seemed to help and support her. Like so many of you, we've tried lots of things. One of the things that I tried to avoid, however, was having a large medication cocktail that my kids were on, but we took a very systematic approach. We also included diet as part of that, heavy protein, and avoiding red and yellow dyes. Include mentors, peers, and tutors. Right? There is something about having a charismatic adult in the life of your child that can be quite extraordinary. I was very glad to be able to play that role for Max in his life. We have hired peer tutors for our kids to help kind of get them and work them through some difficult academic assignments, and it's been very, very successful. Here's a support system for you. Never go to an IEP meeting alone. Always bring an advocate. a couple years ago, I was visiting my cousin, and her son had been struggling in school a little bit, and they actually had an IEP team meeting. And she said, "John, do you want to come?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So I showed up to the meeting, and the principal said, "Well, who's your guest?" And she said, "Well, this is my cousin Johnny. He is he's on the national board of CHAD, and he's the Learning Disabilities president of North Carolina, and runs an organization and school that specifically serves kids with learning disabilities. And he's just here to listen." Well, I am confident that meeting went very differently because I was there. But it's enough just to bring a person, because sometimes, your goals and objectives as part of that IEP process and the school's goals and objectives are not always aligned. One of the things that they have to consider is they've got limited resources that they're trying to distribute amongst everybody, and you want to make sure that your kid gets those resources. And so having an advocate to join you at an IEP meeting is always a great idea. Include all available technology. See, technology can be a tremendous support. We have both of my kids are old enough that they now have phones, and helping Landry learn how to use alarms and reminders on Google. We've got the Alexi, or whatever the voice command, and you could say, "Please remind me at such and such time to finish the thing," and it'll do it. There are tremendous technologies that are available that can act as part of that support system. And I think it's important to remember that available supports are only going to grow over time. And finally, and this is something that I know Susan is going to want to talk about, is children change over time. I have a story that I want to tell about a young man that was just so difficult. I remember hiking out into the woods to pick him up because we were having to remove him from his group for a little while. And by the time I picked him up, he had this enormous rock in his backpack. And I asked my buddy Jim, who was helping me, I said, what is that? What's up with that rock? He said, well, he found a little rock. And I said, he can only have the one. And so then later on, he found a bigger rock. And so he traded out that rock. And then later on, he found a bigger rock. And it just kept happening until, since he could only have the one, he had this giant rock. And he just did not get along well with kids. He needed a lot of one-on-one support. And I thought to myself, this kid is not a fit for SOAR. He just, he needs too much one-on-one support. He just doesn't really connect. Fast forward 4 years later, I'm stepping in with another group because the course director had to handle a family emergency. So I'm working with this team, and there's this young man who's clearly the leader of his group, and he's telling everyone to listen to Big John and how important Big John is, and what a huge role model Big John has been in his life. And I just can't place the kid. It had been years since I'd seen him, and all of a sudden it dawned on me that it was the same child. This young man that I never believed could be successful at SOAR was leading a group. He was motivating other kids. He was doing things in a way that just absolutely blew my mind. And so, I called his mom and I said, I have to tell you how impressed I am with your son. And she said, well, it's been a lot of work, but he's put in a lot of work. We've seen counselors, we've seen mentors, medication has made a huge difference. And so when you put in those support systems and you are willing to have really honest, open conversations about growth can happen. He went from being somebody that I did not believe was a great fit for our program to somebody that I would have hoped to have in my employ someday. I think it's also important, one of the support pieces is your role in your child's life. Very often when you think about it, you spend most of your time talking about chores, talking about, academic frustration, the rote pieces of just trying to get through a day. And I encourage every family who will listen to not let academic frustration destroy your relationship with your child. Do not let them flounder in helplessness. Do not let your role as the homework taskmaster frustrate the parent-child relationship, because ultimately you are their best advocate. You are the person who is helping them define for them who they are. You are the person every day that they can count on, that they can hear, I love you, I care about you, you're important, you matter to me. And I think it's also really important knowing that kids are going to change over time. Things that worked before aren't going to work in the future. Kids change. And you have to be prepared to back off in adolescence and give them a little bit of space to breathe and learn and grow. Because ultimately, what you're looking for when you're trying to develop these quality support systems is that all of these components are working together. Teachers, friends, mentors, and families all create that connection. So in the middle, you've got this dynamic, amazing young person who is learning and growing every day and doing so in a safe and quality environment. Now, that being said, I'd like to introduce you to Susan Simon, because the remainder of this webinar is going to be talking with somebody who was in the trenches and really doing, and growing a young man who is now 34. Max is married, gainfully employed, working for the airlines, and is a tremendous advocate for SOAR. We'll talk with anyone who will listen about what SOAR has meant for him and what it's done in his life. And I think that Susan has some insights as to how she and her husband raised him that might be helpful. And also at the end of this, we'll answer any questions that you have. So before we ask any questions of her, Susan, is there anything that you want to say to parents or grandparents that are listening before we open up for questions?
Well, you're not alone. There are so many of us out there that feel lonely, that we're the only one who have these quirky kids, that nobody wants to talk about that we have these kids that are a little different. But there are so many of them out there that are different, that are struggling. And I think that everybody's touched by somebody in their family that has a kid that's unusual or that might have a learning problem. I think it's spoken about more now than it used to be. So there's a lot more help out there now than there used to be, and not to feel alone about it, not to be embarrassed by it. And there's a lot more help out there now, and to get online and to talk to people about it. And you'll see you don't have to be so lonely and embarrassed, or absolutely not ashamed. And there's a lot of people now to talk about it.
So before we ask the next question, Susie, tell us a little bit about Max and what he did at SOAR and who Max is.
Well, when he was growing up, he had so many issues. When he was a little boy, I mean, he couldn't even wear clothes. He had so many sensitivity issues. He couldn't wear the same pair of socks every day because they hurt his feet. He couldn't wear jeans until he was like 8 or 10 years old because they were too itchy. He had to wear soft pants. There were days I had to take him to school in his pajamas with clothes in a backpack because he just couldn't wear clothes. And then he would just eventually get to the point where he could put them on at school. And of course, his father would argue with him because he didn't understand. Put those clothes on that kid, you know, because it was tough. And nobody understood him then. I understood him. Mothers sometimes just get it, you know. And he wasn't being a tough kid. He just couldn't do it. He just didn't mean to. He wanted to go to school when he was little. He just couldn't put the clothes on. And he didn't have any friends. I was his only friend. And then he finally made one friend. And lights were too bright, and sound was too loud, and everything bothered him. And school was hard. And it wasn't that he wasn't smart. He knew so much. But everything was hard. And I was always his best friend.
I will tell you that one of the things that I remember most about Max was just how engaging he was with adults. And you know, a funny story about Max is that we were near the end of one program. He was staying for 2 courses, and we were near the end of one program, and you know, he had run into some trouble and some challenges, and he wasn't getting along with his group, and we felt like he was going to have more success in his next group, so we pulled him out of the program a little early. But what to do with him?
Yeah.
So my wife adored him, had a chance to interact with him, and she said, "Let's just take him with us." And so we were spending the weekend at a up in Williamsburg, Virginia, and so Max got to join the Wilsons for a family vacation. And you know, again, Miss Dorothy, Miss Dorothy, and he just had so much fun interacting with the family, and he was so easy to interact with. But it was, you know, the social relationships with kids his own age that were such a
He, he
struggle.
never got along with kids his own age. He always got along great with adults. I always took him with me shopping, when I went with friends, because I didn't want to leave him home alone. So I always took him with me. So he always knew how to speak with adults. He always knew how to interact with adults, because he didn't really ever have, he had one friend who was a very, very bright child, who really excelled, who he became an astrophysicist or something. He lives in Austin now and has 2 kids. And it took him a long time my father, who was a very well-known pediatrician here in town, said he's not going to develop and mature until he's in his early 30s. And my father was right. He didn't really mature. And because he was so lonely, I think he developed a real anger problem, because he was angry with the world.
Yeah,
He was angry with everything. He really had an anger problem.
I hear that so much, and you know that there's this sort of cauldron of frustration and anger in so many of our kids. To give some context, you know, can you describe or just list some of the courses that he did at SOAR?
Oh, I will tell you that, but can I tell you a little funny anecdotal story first?
Of course.
There was Father's Day weekend, and we were at SOAR. And we had to come the day after, because for a reason we couldn't come the day of. So you went to find him, and he had some, what do you call this stuff on him? He had something on him. So he said, I'm not going with you. I said, can you just go have lunch with us? He said, no, because you're going to make me go home, and I'm not going home. I said, Max, I'm not going to make you go home. I just want you to have lunch with us. He said, John, tell them I can't go to have lunch with them because they might take me home. I said, I promise I won't take you home. I just want to see you for lunch. He was about 8 or 10. He didn't even want to go for lunch with us.
Because he was
at that time, the camp wasn't even like big like it is now. Those years ago, it was just like a little tiny camping hut and woods. Now you've got a whole big center there. But he went to many, many summer camps, sessions there year after year. He went to your winter Appalachian Trail. He went to the Keys, where you do swimming and jet skiing. He went to Belize with you. Do you still do the Belize thing? Oh, he had such a good time. Yeah. He went to the Keys, where you did jet skiing and camping, but you don't only just do that. You teach the kids how to get along with everybody, and how you do group skills training. And he learned so much. It was so wonderful. And he got to be with you, which has always been so calming for him. And so he learned so much. And I know, even though when he's not with you, I know he calls you, because you've been such a wonderful influence in his life, his whole life, for all of us. And I mean, I know you must have 10 phones, because people must be calling you all the time.
And again, you know, having somebody like me or others as a part of that support network are really critical. So what were, and I know you didn't have a lot of support back in those days, but what were some of the key support systems you surrounded Max and your family with during those years?
Well, we always had a very good therapist, one for me and one for Max. That was good. And my father, like I said, was a pediatrician. He's gone now, but he loved Max so much. And I did keep him away from people who my therapist said to me, there are certain people who are poison in your life, and don't hang around with those people. Don't, even if they're in your family, stay away from those people. They're not good for you. And I did. I stayed away from those people who were not good for us to be around. And it's important to notice that and pay attention to that. And if somebody's not good for you to be around, don't be around them. And and it's important to cut people out of your life if they're not healthy for you. And I did. And I did that for him too. And people that are good for you to be around and that are good influences to be around, well, you make time for those people and keep those people in your life. And I think that was important also. And I took him with me everywhere. Like I said, I took him with me to a football game or a baseball game or a cooking class or everything. And I made sure that he knew how to do a lot of things.
Okay. The next question I wanted to ask you is, I know that there are special things that you say to Max and your other kids that you want to pass along.
Well, I always told him how much I love him, how much he means to me, how much I trust him. And I always told him, Max, I know that you're not comfortable, that you're taking all these different medicines we've tried, that I will keep trying until we go to the ends of the earth, until I find something that's going to work for you. And I took him everywhere. I took him all over the country. Took him to Austin. I took him to Ohio to the Children's Hospital. I took him to New York to a special brain specialist. I took him so many places. And he knows that I keep trying and trying and trying until we could try to find something that might help him. And so he could feel better about different medications. And we tried everything that we could, exercises, diets. And he knows that I would try anything to make him feel that he was like everybody else. Because these kids know that they're not like everybody else. As much as anybody wants to tell them, oh, you're just the same as everybody, they know they're not. They know that they're a little bit different, a little quirky, that they can't do everything everybody else can do, that they don't fit in, that they can't keep up with certain things. I mean, to look at him, he looks perfectly normal, but he talks a little too much. He can't keep up with school quite as well. And he wants to be the same as everybody else, but he knows.
Sure.
Yeah. But he knows nobody in the world loves him more than I do. So.
And when you talk about support, that's at the very core, isn't it? I know you were invested in making sure Max could engage others appropriately. You've talked a lot about that, but what were some specific examples you think are necessary for kids that are quirky to be able to do that?
Well, I think that it's important to have certain skill sets to fit in so that you don't stand out. Like you have to have certain kind of manners. You need to know the difference between an inside voice and an outside voice. You have to look somebody in the eye when you say hello. You need to know how to say hello when you meet somebody. You have to have a good handshake, a good firm handshake, not like a fish. I would say to Max, you're shaking hands like a fish. Shake a good hard handshake. You know how to answer the telephone properly. And as they get older, they need to have different skill sets. Not the same thing when you're 4 and 5 as when you're 8 and 10 as when you're 12 and 14. He learned when he was older, he learned how to do his laundry. When he was younger, he needed to know how to hold a fork properly and not slurp his soup at the table, things like that. And as things come up, you learn how to do them as they come up so that you're appropriate. When you get angry, you don't jump out of the car, you know, because sometimes he got really angry and he had to learn. You just don't jump out of the car when it's moving, because these kids do stupid things. You don't jump off the roof of the pool of the house and jump into the pool. You don't swim across the canal because there might be alligators. That's because we live in Florida. There are some stupid things that kids do that you have to learn. You just don't do. But there are things that are important to learn how to do. That manners are very important to have. And the more you can fit in and do normal, regular things that everybody else does, those are the things you have to do to fit in.
It drives me crazy when I talk to my son on the phone. When he's done with the conversation, he just hangs up. No goodbye.
Well, you have to say hello and goodbye, and you have to be polite.
So Susan and I would often visit them when I would travel in Miami, and I remember having dinner with you one night, and one of my absolute favorite things was, and I talk about it a lot that night, is that you and your husband would offer Max, a daily breakdown of each day, and you would talk about what went well, what didn't go well, how you're going to handle tomorrow, how you would have handled it differently. Can you talk about that? I mean, that seemed to be a nightly, and it was raw. There were no punches were pulled. It was honest and candid and open, and without recrimination or disapproval. Just, it was really quite a master class in kind of what Rick Lavoie calls the social autopsy. Could you speak to that for a little bit?
Oh boy. Well, you learn a lot from the things that you do wrong. Sometimes you learn more from the things that don't go right, obviously, than the things that do go right. And a lot of times he didn't want to talk about the things that didn't go right. And that's usually the days where he learned the most. But when you know that somebody really loves you, it's easier to talk about those tough days, Yeah. And he learned a lot from talking about that. When he'd say, this kid, pushed me down in the bushes. Well, why didn't you go and talk to the teacher? Well, I tried, but the teacher didn't do anything. So I said, okay, well, would you like me to go and talk to the teacher tomorrow? No. Well, will you go and talk to the teacher about it? No. Well, how come, Max? You want to get pushed back in the bushes again tomorrow?
No.
Well, how is that going to help you? And then we would talk about, well, if it's going to happen again, what's going to happen? So we would discuss how to not make that happen.
And by the way, you and your family did that from when he was a child until, he was, 18,
we still do it.
18, 19, 20, 21, and having those very honest conversations about, okay. And so it was a breakdown of what had happened during the day, then how you might handle that differently the next time it comes up. And then what are you going to tackle next day? So you were, prepared for what might come. I remember marveling at that. What were some of the support systems that aren't that are in place now that you did not have while raising Max?
Oh, wow. Well, there are so many different, first of all, they know so much more now than they did then. And there's so many more medications that seem to work now. Back then, you were my main support. I don't think I could have gotten through life without you. Now they have so many different support groups that you can go on the computer, you can look up different things, and there's so much to find. There are books, so many more books now. it's so easy to talk about now that you couldn't talk about then. Back then it was like a shame to talk about. You had a kid that was different, everybody would like, were a pariah. There are groups now that you can go to, like at a church or a temple or a...
You've been talking about friendship circles.
Yes, there is a friendship circle. In many towns across the country, there's a place called the Friendship Circle where you can go to, where they have, it's a one-on-one friend that they give your kid for the year. And they do different activities with your child. And they have an outlet for parents where they have support groups for parents.
Well, you know, I think it's critical to recognize that it's a process, it's a journey, and it's something that is not going to happen easily or without frustration but also amazing successes and unique opportunities, right?
And remember, your kid is going to mature. And they're going to learn. Every year they learn from their mistakes from the past year. And every time that they do something, it's an experience, and they'll learn from every experience. And it'll get better. I mean, Max has a job now that he's had for quite a while, and he's married, and he's happy, and he lives on his own. And he's been with this lady now, this woman. She's a college graduate, and they've been living together for 4 or 5 years now, and they're very happy. So it's a very nice thing.
Tremendous. Well, we're going to open it up for any questions or comments that people might have or want. And for either Susan or myself, when we're talking about nurturing or developing support systems or how we support our kids through those difficult times, I want to thank you, Susan, for being willing to share, so intimately the experiences that you had, and what a pleasure it has been to be a part of you and Max's life.
I feel the same way about you. Thank you.
So one of the questions that just popped up is, how do I keep my 21-year young adult to keep her job?
For me?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, in our house, what we said was, you don't have to keep your job. You only have to keep it until you find another job. You never quit a job until you have another job. And that's that's the rule in our house.
You created that as an expectation and as an ethic.
Right. You don't have to, you don't quit one job until you have another.
I think that's great advice. I would also add that that helping them find jobs that tailor to their strengths or interests could be really critical to that being successful, and recognize that that if they are let go, if companies say, you know what, you're not working out, then I think it's important to kind of tap into the things that allow our kids to be successful, so that they don't set themselves up for failure.
And make sure that they're not in a job where somebody is harming them or sexual, that they're not having a problem there that would be bad for them. They're not being abused or something, of course. But if it's just because they don't like it, then they can't leave just because they don't feel like it.
And it's it's tailoring jobs to strengths, but also creating responsibility pieces. If a young child doesn't have to, or a teen doesn't have to have responsibilities, then then why not just live on their parents' dime for as long as possible?
Oh no.
So there are motivators like, if they want to be able to pay for a phone, if they want to have a car for insurance, if they want to be able to have Wi-Fi, they can get their own Wi-Fi. Figure out the things that matter and have them be invested in participating in the expense of those things, I think could be really, really critical to creating the motivation to not only not lose the job, but also perhaps finding a job that they like. Okay. Well, I think that was the only question, and we are welcome to take any emails that you may have. I want to thank everybody for participating uh, and letting us be a part of your Tuesday. I would like to share with you the upcoming series that we're doing and that I'm kind of excited about. Uh, um, the on next month we've got a fun series that that I'm very excited about. Let's see. I'm pulling up that information right now. I'm going to be doing a series on in September on the behavior management guide we've created for families. But first, on August 4th, the next week, the title of the workshop is Urgency Driven: Unlocking the Power of Procrastination. On the 11th, I'm doing a workshop on organizational strategies, tackling the beast one pile at a time. August 18th, Gift or Curse: Hidden Gifts of ADHD That Keep Giving. On the 25th, Diane and Elaine Taylor-Klaus from Impact ADD are going to be doing a guest webinar for us on how to reduce stress for you and your child. As I mentioned, in September, I'm beginning the series. September 1st will be General Strategies, Maximizing the Art of Creative Strategy. September 8th, 10 Tips to Keep the Family from Going Bonkers. September 15th, Individual Strategies, Customizing Your Connection. September 22nd, Communication Strategies, Avoiding the Failure to Communicate. And then on the 29th, I'm going to wrap it up with Anna Lapinto, one of our social media people, did a survey, and you asked for this one on how to get outside. And so the workshop is titled "The Power of No Power: How to Unplug and Get Outside." So we thank you all again for your time, your energy. We appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Susan, for joining us, and
You're welcome.
talk with you all soon. Have a great week.